June 7th, 1942, Hashirajima Anchorage. Inland Sea, Japan. The morning air smells of wet pine from the surrounding hills, but inside the operations shack it is ink, sweat, and cigarette smoke. A fan turns lazily, moving nothing. On the wall, a map of the Central Pacific has fresh grease pencil marks like wounds. The red circles around Midway are still there, but the confidence is gone. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Chief of Staff to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, stands stiff-backed over a desk piled with message pads. He holds a report as if the paper itself might bite. Around him, staff officers keep their faces smooth, but their hands betray them, tightening on rulers and compass dividers, tapping on the tabletop. Outside, somewhere in the gray distance, the battleship Yamato lies at anchor, heavy and silent, the symbol of power that did not save them. The numbers are brutal, even before anyone says them aloud. 4 fleet carriers gone: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. Their flight decks burned, their hangars turned into furnaces, their air groups shattered. At Midway, the pride of the First Air Fleet vanished in an afternoon of American dive bombers dropping out of the sun. Ugaki reads again, because the mind keeps searching for an alternate version of reality. The Americans lost Yorktown. Yes, that matters. It is the single clean piece of news the staff can grip. Yorktown sunk. It is something that balances the ledger, at least on paper. Across the room, an officer murmurs the idea that will settle into doctrine without anyone formally signing it. The Americans came with 3 carriers. They lost 1. Therefore, they have 2 left, maybe 3 if one was hiding. 2, perhaps, in the Pacific. The rest, if any exist at all, must be far away. It sounds reasonable. It sounds comforting, and comfort is dangerous. In Tokyo, at the Naval General Staff, the same arithmetic takes root. Admiral Osami Nagano's planners speak in clipped, careful phrases, calculating future operations as if the carrier force is a set of counters on a game board. They imagine the Americans licking their wounds for a year. They imagine American pilots scarce, decks empty, repairs slow. They imagine a nation that cannot quickly replace what is lost. But what is actually being underestimated is not a ship. It is a system. In the days after Midway, Yamamoto's circle searches for explanations that fit the old world, the world where skill and surprise decide everything. They talk about fate, about bad luck with search planes, about the fog of war, about mistakes. Yes, but mistakes that can be corrected. Few of them speak out loud the terrifying possibility that the enemy's capacity is simply larger than their own. Ugaki walks outside into the bright air and hears gulls. He looks toward the anchored fleet and feels the weight of every hull, every gun, every proud line of steel. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all of it formidable. Yet he cannot stop seeing the empty spaces where carriers should be. He imagines the lost flight decks as if they are still burning somewhere beyond the horizon. A staff officer approaches, salutes, and offers a new dispatch. Ugaki scans it quickly. It is mostly routine, movements and fuel, logistics and repairs. Then a line catches his eye, American radio traffic, noisy and persistent, the kind that suggests an operational tempo. He frowns. The first crack in the comfortable assumption. How many carriers can they still have ready? Someone asks softly. Not to Ugaki, but to the room, to the air, to fate itself. No one answers with certainty. They answer with what they need to believe. Not many. A senior officer says, they will be cautious now. And in that moment, the Japanese command does something more decisive than any order. They begin to plan the next months as if time is on Japan's side, as if the enemy has been crippled. as if Midway was a mutual bleeding rather than a strategic turning point. They speak of rebuilding the air groups, of training replacements, of finishing new carriers. They imagine the Americans doing the same, but slower, across the Pacific, in shipyards and training fields. The United States is already proving that assumption wrong. But in Hashirajima, under the turning fan and the smoke-stained ceiling, the Japanese leadership cannot yet see the wave that is forming. They will, soon enough. The dispatch paper is still warm from the radio room when Ugaki folds it and slips it into a file. Outside, the day continues like any other. Sailors scrub decks. Signal flags snap in the breeze. The fleet looks intact if you keep your eyes away from what is missing. But the war does not pause for grief. In July 1942, the tempo of messages begins to change. Not the big announcements, not the kind that make headlines in Tokyo, but the small things that keep a Navy alive: submarine sightings, Coast Watcher reports, intercepted chatter, patrol plane contacts. They arrive like raindrops at first, easy to dismiss, then more frequent, harder to ignore. At Truk Lagoon, in the humid heat of the Caroline Islands, staff officers lean over charts with sweat darkening their collars. Truk is the forward heart of Japanese power, a vast anchorage surrounded by jungle-green slopes and reef-edged shallows. Carrier aircraft once came and went here with easy confidence, the sun glinting off wings painted with red hinomaru. Now, the absence is felt as a kind of emptiness in the sky. A message comes in from the Solomon Islands chain, American activity increasing, aircraft overhead, reconnaissance flights, unusual numbers of transports moving south. It sounds like preparation, not desperation. Another report follows. An American carrier task force, perhaps, somewhere east of the New Hebrides. Unconfirmed. No visual. Just the pattern of radio traffic and the vague shadow seen by a patrol plane at extreme range. The Japanese officers in the room exchange looks that say the same thing without speech. It is too soon. The Americans should still be recovering. They should still be short of decks. They should not be acting like they have options. One captain scoffs and says the obvious defense. They are trying to bluff. They know we are weakened. They want us to hesitate. But hesitation is not in the Imperial Navy's blood. The instinct is to strike, to seize initiative, to force the enemy to react. And so orders begin to flow, cautious at first, then more committed. Reinforce the southern perimeter. Watch the Solomons. Prepare to contest anything near New Guinea and the sea lanes to Australia. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff reviews the same threads of information and tries to weave them into a picture that preserves their earlier arithmetic. If the Americans have carriers, maybe it is the ones they did not use at Midway. Maybe one was in the Atlantic. Maybe they scraped together an escort carrier. Maybe they are risking everything, gambling their last decks in one bold move. The word last is the key. The assumption remains. The Americans are assumed to be operating from scarcity, and that assumption blinds them to the real danger. A nation that does not feel scarce fights differently. August approaches, and the pressure builds like a storm front. In the Solomons, the Japanese have been constructing an airfield on Guadalcanal, a jungle-covered island that seems small on a map but sits on a vital crossroads. The airfield is meant to threaten Allied supply routes and project power south. The work crews, many of them Korean laborers under guard, cut and level the earth under relentless heat. Every day the runway takes more shape. Then, in the first week of August 1942, the horizon cracks open. At Truk, the first firm indications arrive not as a clear sighting but as panic in fragments. American landings, large numbers of transports, warships covering them, a sudden and violent push into the southern Solomons. The name comes through like a curse. Guadalcanal. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, commanding the newly formed 8th Fleet at Rabaul, is forced into action with incomplete information. Rabaul is another humid, volcanic fortress, its harbor crowded with ships and ringed by airfields. Mikawa is a cruiser officer, aggressive, sharp-eyed, a man who believes in night fighting and decisive blows. He is not a carrier commander, and he does not have carriers. What he has are cruisers and destroyers, torpedoes, and the darkness. But as Mikawa prepares his striking force, another piece of information lands like a stone in the stomach. American carrier aircraft have been seen, not land-based, carrier-based. The reports are consistent dive bombers, fighters, the rhythm of a carrier air group working over a beachhead. It is the kind of detail that makes rooms go quiet, because it means there are flight decks nearby. In Tokyo, telephones ring. Officers walk faster down corridors. The calm math of post-Midway assumptions now collides with a hard operational reality. American carriers are present in an offensive operation less than 2 months after Midway. Somewhere in a staff room, an admiral asks the question that cannot be kept down anymore. "How?" he says, voice tight. "Are they already here again?" No one wants to answer with the truth, because the truth is larger than ships and tactics. The truth is factories, training pipelines, repair docks, oil and steel and assembly lines. The truth is that even if Yorktown is on the bottom, the Americans have not been reduced to a handful of desperate decks. They have a machine. Mikawa's cruisers will soon slip into the dark waters near Savo Island, hunting the Allied screen. He will win a savage night battle and still fail to change the strategic outcome, because the presence of American carriers, even briefly, changes what everyone on the Japanese side believes about time. The enemy is not taking a year to return. They are returning now. August 24th, 1942, southeast of Guadalcanal. Open sea, the skies the color of hot metal, a glare that hurts the eyes. Far below it, the ocean rolls in long blue swells, indifferent to flags and empires. On the bridge of a Japanese cruiser in the outer screen, a lookout squints at the horizon, then at the smoke smears that should not be there. Somewhere beyond the curve of the world, American ships are moving, and over them, American aircraft circle like hawks. The word carrier is spoken again and again in clipped bursts over radio circuits. It is no longer a rumor, no longer an analyst's guess. It is a fact confirmed by bombs and strafing runs, by the unmistakable silhouette of fighters banking hard into the sun. Back at Rabaul, Mikawa's staff listens to reports with faces that grow stonier by the minute. The Americans have not only landed at Guadalcanal, they are sustaining it. That means they have either air cover strong enough to contest Japanese bombers, or they have carriers close enough to punch holes in every counterattack. For the Japanese Navy, the shock is not merely that the Americans are bold. It is that they are bold with resources. At Combined Fleet Headquarters, the same problem lands on Yamamoto's desk in the form of cold operational necessity. If the Americans hold Guadalcanal, the southern perimeter cracks. The sea lanes to Rabaul, to New Guinea, to the whole defensive arc they imagined after Midway, come under constant threat. To fight for the island, they must push ships and men into a narrow corridor of sea between the Solomons, a corridor that will soon earn its name in blood, Iron Bottom Sound. Yet every move they make is now haunted by the idea that American carrier groups may appear again at any moment. On paper, the Japanese still have carriers, Shokaku, Zuikaku. The smaller Zuiho, they have pilots with experience, men who survived Coral Sea and Pearl Harbor and Midway, but the losses have carved deep. Aircrew training is slow. Experienced leaders are irreplaceable. Every sortie feels like spending a coin that cannot be earned back. The Americans, meanwhile, fight as if they can afford to spend. In a stuffy Tokyo office lit by summer haze, a naval general staff officer taps a pencil against a chart. He has been arguing for days that the enemy cannot sustain this tempo. He says the Americans must be gambling their last carrier strength to cover the landings, that they will withdraw the moment the Japanese strike back with force. He says it because it preserves a world he understands. Then a new report lands. American carriers still operating. Airstrikes continuing. Fighter cover thick. The pattern does not look like a desperate last stand. It looks like a rotation, like a system working. In the Solomons, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft risk everything to find the enemy decks. A float plane claws through clouds, its engine straining, crews scanning for the telltale wake patterns of a carrier task force. Below, the sea is broken by scattered whitecaps and the glint of sunlight. The crew spots something, a tiny dark shape with escorts, and the radio operator sends a burst transmission. Coordinates, course, speed. This is the moment the Japanese feel the ground shift under their feet, because the contact report is not of a single battered carrier limping, but of an organized force moving with confidence. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is gone from the carrier force after Midway, his reputation scorched along with Akagi's deck. Command changes hands, but the problem is unchanged. They have to engage, and they have to engage while feeling like they are fighting blind. American carriers appear, strike, then vanish behind weather and distance, protected by radar and disciplined screens. At sea, on Japanese destroyers dashing down the slot at night, sailors begin to speak of American aircraft with a different tone. Not contempt, not the old belief that American pilots are soft or unskilled. They speak of them like an environmental hazard, like sudden squalls or reefs. The Americans are always there in daylight, always overhead, always ready to punish anything slow or exposed. The disbelief hardens into fear after the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. Japanese air groups launch, find the enemy, attack with skill and courage, and still the American carrier survives. Hits are scored, ships burn, planes fall, but the American formation remains in being. Worse, the Japanese lose aircraft they cannot easily replace. The arithmetic begins to flip. It is no longer about how many carriers the Americans have today. It is about how many they will have tomorrow. In staff meetings, admirals and captains begin to say things that would have sounded unthinkable in June. They speak of American production as a weapon. They speak of shipyards as if they are arsenals firing hulls into the ocean. They begin to suspect that even when they sink an enemy ship, they may not be reducing the enemy's power for long. A senior officer at Combined Fleet, voice low, tries to reassure a room of tense faces. If we destroy their carriers here, they will be finished in the Pacific. But he sounds as though he is trying to convince himself, because the Americans keep coming, not as a single stab, but as a sustained pressure. Every time the Japanese scrape together a convoy, American aircraft appear. Every time they attempt to build up troops, American bombers strike Henderson Field or the shipping offshore. And when Japanese planes come to attack, American fighters rise to meet them. In the late summer heat, under skies filled with contrails and smoke, Japanese commanders realize the nightmare scenario. They are entering a battle of attrition against a country that does not think in terms of scarcity. The shock is over. Now comes the reckoning. September 1942. Tokyo, Naval General Staff Building. The corridor smells of polished wood and damp wool uniforms drying after rain. Outside, traffic hums. Civilians moving through their lives with only fragments of the far war reaching them. Inside, behind closed doors, the men who command the ocean try to name what they are seeing. A meeting room fills with senior officers, faces composed, eyes tired. The maps on the table are different now than they were in June. The neat perimeter lines are becoming smudged, overwritten by new arrows, new danger zones, and the grim constant of Guadalcanal sitting like a thorn in the southern defense. An admiral runs a finger along the Solomon Islands chain. His hand pauses at Guadalcanal, then slides eastward into the blank blue where American carrier groups move unseen. He exhales. and the sound carries more weight than a shouted order. The enemy carriers, he says, carefully, should not be able to maintain this. He is speaking as if endurance is a law of physics. Another officer replies with the old logic. Yorktown was sunk. Saratoga was damaged earlier. Enterprise was hit. Hornet was present. They cannot have many more. The statement hangs in the air for a moment, then dies under the pressure of reality. Because the Americans did not behave as if they had only a couple of decks left. They behaved as if losing one simply changed the schedule, not the strategy. Someone at the far end of the table, a man with a narrow face and a voice like a blade, says what the others have been avoiding. They are replacing losses faster than we assumed. No one contradicts him. In that silence, the illusion breaks further. The Japanese Navy has always believed in decisive battle, a climactic clash where the enemy fleet is reduced, the balance of power restored by superior spirit and tactical brilliance. It is a worldview built for a nation with limited industrial depth, because the decisive battle is how you win without having to build more than the enemy. But Guadalcanal is not becoming decisive in the way they wanted. It is becoming a grinding furnace where every successful Japanese night run is answered by American daylight air power. And every American loss is met with more ships, more planes, more fuel. Reports circulate from the front. Officers who return from Rabaul and Truk speak with a new bitterness. They talk about American radar, about carrier fighters appearing at the right altitude at the right time, about the way American formations recover and reconstitute after strikes. They speak of American damage control as if it is some unnatural trick, keeping ships afloat that should be dead. In a separate room, Admiral Yamamoto's staff confronts the same truth through numbers: fuel consumption, aircraft losses, pilot replacements. They see the curve and realize it points one way. Even if they win tactically, they may lose strategically by bleeding faster than they can heal. Vice Admiral Ugaki writes in his diary late at night, the scratch of pen on paper the only sound. His words are not for subordinates, not for propaganda, not even for history. They are for himself. The tone is tight, controlled, but beneath it runs disbelief. He notes how quickly the Americans have returned, how the enemy seems able to send carriers to cover landings, withdraw them, then return again. The implication is crushing. It means that Midway, while a disaster, did not cripple the United States in the way Japan's leaders assumed. It means the war will not be decided by one brilliant strike. In another office, a staff officer sketches out production estimates and pauses, realizing he does not even know the enemy's true capacity. Japan has built its strategy on assumptions about American limits. Now those limits are dissolving, perhaps. Someone says, voice hesitant, we underestimated their shipbuilding. The sentence is almost too mild for the reality it describes. Because what they are beginning to see is not simply shipbuilding, it is mobilization. An entire industrial nation turning itself into an engine of hulls and aircraft. Even if the admirals do not have full intelligence, they feel it in the tempo of operations. They feel it the way the enemy can choose where to appear. They feel it when they sink a cruiser and another takes its place, when they damage a carrier and another carrier appears weeks later as if conjured. The mood shifts from confidence wounded to something more corrosive. It becomes doubt about the framework of the war itself. Out at sea, Japanese carrier pilots sit on deck before launch, adjusting harness straps, checking oxygen lines, trying not to show fear. They look at the flight deck crews and see fewer veteran faces. They look at the horizon and wonder if American fighters will already be waiting. In October, the pressure intensifies. The Japanese commit more heavily. They send battleships down the slot to shell Henderson Field at night. They pour troops into the island in desperate attempts to break the Marines' hold. The Navy escorts convoys, fights surface actions, loses destroyers and cruisers in a steady, costly stream. Then comes the knowledge that strikes deeper than any torpedo. American carriers are still present. Not always, not everywhere, but enough. Enough to change every calculation. Enough to force Japanese ships to hide in bad weather, to move at night, to accept that daylight belongs to the enemy. An admiral, standing over the map, finally says it in a voice that sounds older than his years. This is not the America we planned to fight. The room absorbs that sentence like a wound, because planning, for a navy, is belief made into orders. And now the belief is failing. They are not simply surprised. They are being outpaced. October 26th, 1942, north of the Santa Cruz Islands. The sea is rough. A hard gray surface broken by white spray. And the wind has teeth. On the bridge of the carrier Shokaku, an officer grips the railing and watches the deck crews below as they wrestle aircraft into position. Engines cough to life one by one, the sound rising into a steady roar that makes the chest vibrate. The pilots stand near their planes, faces expressionless, but their eyes track every movement, every signal, every second. They know what this is. Another carrier battle. Another attempt to break the American grip on Guadalcanal by destroying the decks that feed it. The Japanese strike groups launch into the turbulent air, climbing above cloud layers, the formation tightening as they head toward the reported enemy position. From below, the carrier's wake foams like a scar across the sea. Destroyers cut through the swells, their bows punching spray high into the air. Across the distance, American carriers are doing the same, launching fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, their decks alive with motion. The Americans have radar. They have a practiced rhythm. They have learned fast. The air above the Santa Cruz Islands becomes crowded with intent. For Japanese commanders, Santa Cruz is supposed to be a correction of Midway. Better scouting, better timing. A clean strike that sinks American carriers and buys the months needed to crush Guadalcanal. But even before the first bombs fall, the deeper fear is present like a shadow. What if sinking one American carrier no longer matters the way it used to? The battle erupts in bursts of violence. Planes find ships. Bombs slam into decks. Torpedoes carve through water toward hulls. Anti-aircraft fire turns the sky into a jagged net of black puffs and orange tracer lines. When American planes reach Shokaku, they hit with deadly accuracy. Bombs smash into the flight deck, tearing metal, igniting fuel, sending flames down into the hangar spaces. Sailors rush with hoses, foam, and desperate courage. Smoke billows, thick and oily, stinging eyes and throats. Men shout orders, drag wounded comrades, kick loose burning debris into the sea. Shokaku survives, but she is wounded badly enough to withdraw. That alone is a strategic victory for the Americans, because every Japanese carrier forced out of action is a hole Japan cannot easily patch. In the course of the fighting, the Japanese managed to hit American carriers as well. Hornet is struck repeatedly, hammered until she is a burning ruin. Later finished, Enterprise takes damage. For a moment, it looks like the kind of exchange Japanese doctrine was built for. And yet the Japanese pilots returning to their carriers do not feel triumph. They feel the gap widening beneath their feet. Because even when the Americans lose a carrier, the American presence does not evaporate. Their screen remains organized. Their air patrols persist. Their operational posture looks like it can continue. For the Japanese, the cost is not only aircraft. It is the men inside them. The veterans who remain are fewer now. The new pilots have courage, but not the long-hardened instincts that saved lives in earlier battles. The training system cannot keep up. Every carrier battle becomes a filter that drains experience from the Imperial Navy and returns it to the sea in parachutes that never open, in cockpits that vanish into cloud and fire. After Santa Cruz, Japanese leaders face a bitter ledger. They may have sunk Hornet, but they have lost many of the skilled air crew they needed to win future battles. The carrier force still exists, but its sharp edge is blunting, and this is when the American carriers begin to feel less like individual ships and more like a tides. In November 1942, as surface battles rage around Guadalcanal, American naval forces keep returning. Battleships appear. Fight, withdraw, return. Cruisers replace cruisers. Destroyers fill gaps with fresh hulls. The Americans absorb losses and continue the campaign as if the line does not break. Japanese commanders watch this and feel a kind of helpless anger. They destroy an enemy ship and expect the enemy to recoil. Instead, another ship arrives. In Tokyo, the tone of meetings changes again. There is less talk of decisive battle and more talk of endurance, less talk of glorious annihilation and more talk of protecting what remains. The strategic initiative, once held tightly, is now slipping. And beneath every discussion is the same haunting question. How many carriers will the Americans have next month, next year? In late 1942, intelligence estimates begin to whisper what feels impossible. New American carriers under construction, not small conversions only, but fleet carriers, more escorts, more hulls. Even the names, when they are heard, sound like rumors. It forces the Japanese to confront the thing they most feared to admit. Their early war successes were made possible by striking before America could fully mobilize. Midway did not end that mobilization. It accelerated the American resolve. The shock at Guadalcanal was only the first sign. Santa Cruz is another. Each battle confirms that the United States is not fighting with a fixed pool of strength. It is fighting with a pipeline. At sea, a Japanese aviator sits in a ready room, helmet on his knees, sweat cooling on his skin. He listens to the briefing and hears the words again. Enemy carriers reported, enemy carriers approaching, enemy carriers operating. He thinks back to June, when the officers spoke as if the Americans would be finished. He wants to laugh, but there is no humor left in him. The Americans are not finished. They are arriving in waves. December 1942. Truck Lagoon. Rain falls in warm sheets, drumming on steel decks and turning the lagoon surface into a field of ripples. The jungle hills vanish behind mist. A cruiser lies at anchor with tarps rigged over gun mounts. Sailors moving like ghosts in the gray. The war feels far away for a moment until the radio room crackles and the distance collapses. A message arrives, terse, operational, impossible to ignore. More American carrier activity. Fresh units. New task groups moving with confidence. The tone is not speculation anymore. The Americans are not merely holding Guadalcanal. They are shaping the tempo across the theater. In a wardroom, officers gather around a chart table. The lamp above it throws a tight circle of light, leaving faces half in shadow. The discussion is not loud. It does not need to be. Every man in the room understands that the assumptions of early 1942 have been burned away. They speak of Midway as if it were a door that slammed shut on one war and opened onto another. Before Midway, Japan believed it could shock America into negotiation by destroying its fleet, seizing territory, and presenting a defensive perimeter too costly to break. After Midway, that plan required time. After Guadalcanal, it becomes clear time belongs to the enemy. One officer, younger than the others, asks a question that would have been punished as defeatism months ago: if they can build faster than we can sink, what does victory even look like? No one answers directly. Instead, an older commander explains the reality in the plain language sailors respect. It means every ship we lose matters more than every ship they lose. The sentence lands hard because it is the truth the Admirals have been circling without naming. Japan can still fight brilliantly. It can still win battles. But if the war becomes a contest of replacement, Japan is fighting uphill with a pack on its back. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff receives updated estimates, not complete, Not perfectly accurate, but enough. American shipbuilding is not a trickle, it is a flood. New carriers coming online, new aircraft types, improved radar, training programs turning civilians into pilots at a scale Japan cannot match. Repair facilities that return damaged ships to service with astonishing speed. The Japanese leaders do not need to see the assembly lines to feel their effects. They feel it when American carriers appear again after being hit. They feel it when American operations do not pause for seasons. They feel it when the enemy can accept losses and continue the offensive without breaking stride. Admiral Yamamoto's staff begins to frame the problem in terms that sound almost like awe, though no one would call it that. The United States is not simply an opponent. It is an industrial continent, and the most bitter element of the shock is that this was always visible. If you dared to look, the size of American steel production, the vastness of its oil reserves and refinery capacity, the shipyards on both coasts, the ability to move resources through a secure homeland untouched by bombing. The Japanese Navy, brilliant at tactics and courage, had built a strategy that assumed America would behave like Japan. Limited by the same kinds of constraints, it was a mirror illusion. The disbelief after Guadalcanal was the moment the mirror shattered. As the Guadalcanal campaign grinds toward its end, Japanese ships still run the slot, still fight savage night actions, still deliver troops under fire. Sailors still stand at guns until their hands bleed. Pilots still climb into cockpits knowing the odds are tilting. The Imperial Navy remains dangerous, capable of sudden violence, but the strategic language changes. The talk is no longer about forcing America to compromise. It is about holding, conserving, surviving long enough to seek an opening. Even that hope fades as the pattern becomes undeniable. Every month, the American presence thickens. More ships, more aircraft, better coordination. The carriers are not isolated spears anymore. They are part of a combined force that can sustain itself, rotate units, repair damage, and return again and again. The psychological shock, the one your script is built around, is not a single quote shouted in anger. It is the slow realization settling into the bones of an entire command structure. At Midway, they believed they had cut out the heart of American carrier power. At Guadalcanal, they discovered the heart was not in a handful of ships. It was in factories, workers, shipwrights, training pipelines, and an economy that could turn loss into production schedules. In the rain at Truk, an officer steps out onto the deck and looks across the lagoon. The anchored ships are dark shapes against the mist. He can hear the soft slap of water against hull plates and the distant clank of a chain. It feels like a pause, but he knows it is not. Somewhere out beyond the horizon, American task forces are moving. Their carriers launching patrols, their crews cycling through routines honed by constant operations. They are not waiting for Japan to recover. They are pressing. The officer thinks of the early months, of the confidence with which senior men spoke about American weakness. He remembers the phrase that floated through staff rooms after Midway, repeated until it became belief: the enemy carriers are finished. Now, with Guadalcanal bleeding the empire and new American carriers appearing like dawn after darkness, that phrase feels almost childish. He grips the wet rail and finally understands the cruelest truth of the war at sea. You can sink a ship. You cannot sink an industrial tide.